Hi guys, is Rupert Lowe a fascist? And is that an unfair question? Well, the former Tory turned Reform UK MP turned independent sat down with somebody I have a huge amount of respect for. Only joking, it was Michael Gove at The Spectator. Lowe gave us a hint of what he would do if perhaps he was still in Reform UK and it won a general election with a massive majority. He seems to support something like what Donald Trump in the US or Viktor Orbán in Hungary is doing, not respecting the role of the civil service. Have a listen to this part of the hour-long interview, and then tell me if you think he's a fascist.
So, I mean, look, you had an 80-seat majority, Michael. You've got a bit of blood on your hands, as have all the Tory party, because when you had that 80-seat majority, I mean, my goodness, what I would do for an 80-seat majority now. And you get a group of sensible people who know which way is up, and then you can start to repeal, that's the first thing that's got to happen, and then you can start to hold to account the permanent secretaries in the civil service, who, in my view, have become a law unto themselves. They're the next target. They need to be sorted out. They're not elected. They've got tremendous power. And I talk to ministers who say, you know, they now bump ministers off aeroplanes and, you know, they are the real power base now, because if you have deficient frontbench ministers, they don't hold the civil service to account. And in the past, I think the civil service had a sort of moral conscience that the secret's in the name, you know, the civil service, they're in the service of the people. And I think they did actually understand that they were serving an elected government. I think they've lost sight of that now. So I think a lot of the sort of malign, the DEI, all the nonsense that I regale against every day has poisoned them. And I think over time, after the war, where I think Britain actually respected individualism, it respected freedom, it had 2 world wars where a lot of its best people had died, I think that's waned, and I think we've now got these jumped up little people who aren't being held to account, who are basically pursuing their own agenda. And I question whether a lot of them are what I would call patriots. I don't think a lot of them are.
He shouldn't be really throwing around that slogan, that word, that adjective. Anyway, he mentioned it on 2 occasions here, that civil servants, the civil service, need to be held to account by politicians. No, that's not the job of politicians. The job of politicians is to implement a manifesto. They're supposed to be elected on the back of a manifesto, and they're supposed to implement that manifesto, and the civil service is there to facilitate that. Now, he mentioned how, well, in the past, they used to implement government policy, because in the past, we didn't generally have politicians that would try to break international law. Yes, on some occasions they did, and the civil service went along with that, but the civil service have been pushing back on the likes of Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, and other politicians, generally conservatives, over the last number of years, because they've been trying to break the law. The civil servants are paid a lot of money. Some of them are paid even more than the Prime Minister. But they don't have the immunity that the Prime Minister has. I keep saying this. If there was a crime committed, the civil servant can't say, I was just following orders. While the MP or the Prime Minister may be able to get away with breaking the law, civil servants cannot. It would be them going to prison when a minister would be going free. Now, Rupert Lowe either doesn't understand this or he's pretending not to understand this. Because we heard this before. Priti Patel, Suella Braverman saying, we want to deport loads of people, but we can't because of the blob, or because of the deep state, or because of the civil service. That's a lie. You're just offloading responsibility, offloading your failures onto somebody else. They used to blame the EU. Now they can't do that, so they have to blame somebody else. And of course, well, it's easy just to blame the civil service. And what Rupert Lowe is saying here is, well, what he would do is he would either stack the civil service with supporters who would break the law, or he would close it down or something, I don't know. But you need the civil service to follow the law. They take an unofficial oath to serve the law, to respect the law, to serve the people, not to serve the politician, to implement government policy, but it must be within the law. It must be within certain standards. That's why the civil service were saying, look, we can't send people to Rwanda, because the Supreme Court said it's unlawful. The politicians can say whatever the hell they want, but the civil service is there to implement government policy, but also to respect international conventions and to respect British law. Once again, it would be their head on the chopping block if something goes wrong, not the politician. So what sort of country would Rupert Lowe like to live in? One where politicians can take decisions and not have any pushback from the law, from the civil service, from the judiciary, from anyone else. Basically a dictatorship. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.